these are the fun ones. The aliens. I almost forgot to put Kosh in there. He's so in the episode, so small, little.
He's what, in 3 episodes?
Now I'm like, oh wait, did I forget somebody? Oh yeah, Kosh.
Yeah,
There's another
yeah,
guy.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe five, maybe 5 or 6.
and you forgot the the alien, what is it, the lesser planet,
Well, there's a whole bunch of the
yeah,
The unaligned world.
the coalition, what
coalition.
are the non-aligned worlds?
Yeah.
Unaligned worlds. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Who wants to go first? Pick one and go.
Well, the obvious one is Londo and Jakar. You know, the Narn and Centauri are a little more than cold war enemies. You know, they're basically just barely below open hostility to each other, as we mentioned in the opening.
Just a tick lower.
Yeah, the Narn recently regained their independence from Centauri oppression, and Jakar has a pretty interesting arc in this season. I think that he's we pointed out in some of the earlier episodes, or at least I did. The way I saw him was he was kind of a punching bag a lot. You know, he was very hostile and trying to do underhanded things a lot, and they called him out on it and kind of slapped him down several times.
Early in the season, you mean?
Right, early in the earliest parts of the season. And Londo was basically a clown. You know,
Right.
he didn't. You know, it's like he's a drunk and a gambler and everything. He's just, he's not happy with where the Centauri are, but he's kind of accepted it grudgingly. And he's an older character. Both of them are relatively old, seasoned. But they hate each other. That's very clear. We know Londo tells us that him and Jakar kills him. He ends his life with his Jakar's hands around his throat because the Centauri have these premonitions of their own death.
Right.
So we know that these two are going to have a history, or a lot of interaction, I should say.
Doesn't Jakar want to chew the marrow from the bones?
Oh yeah, they're open talk. Genocide is not a problem for either.
Oh yeah,
guys,
they're
Right.
completely like that's totally on the table.
That's the price of doing business.
Well, except Londo is too lazy to commit genocide. I think. Maybe.
Well, all of the Centauri are. It's they're that's
but
the Centauri
was he?
story. Well, okay.
Yeah.
That was a recent episode.
That's the whole thing with the Centauri, though, is they know they're in decline and they're just kind of accepting it, right? And the Narn are the opposite. They are hot to dominate.
And they are rising.
I find it interesting that the Narn are portrayed as these bestial creatures, and yet they were the agrarians early, historically. Now they have delved into arms trade, but I wouldn't put it past the Centauri either to do that too,
Not
just
only
maybe a little
that,
more diplomatically.
Not only that, but they're also the ones in the show that have, at least what we've seen so far, they have a faith. They have a religion.
They have multiple religions.
Yeah,
Who, the
well, but
Narn do?
yeah, the
You know,
Narn.
right?
Because
The Narn have multiple. We know of at least 2, I think, because Jakar has his religion, his
Yeah.
faith, and his second assistant,
Yeah.
the Toth.
Toth.
Yeah, she comes from a different faith. Well, her mother was of a different faith. She's basically atheistic in her sense. So, but there are at least a couple of religions of the Narn people. Now, the Centauri have how many? I think that was a trivia question, wasn't it? If you
no,
count, there was 50. If you count the how many gods they have.
Yeah.
Okay,
fi-
but
well, it's
that's-
50. That's 50 gods. That's not necessarily
50
50
gods.
religions.
Yeah.
No,
So
they're polytheistic.
Yeah, they're polytheistic.
The Centauri are polytheistic, I guess. The Narn are not necessarily. They haven't really specified whether they're mono or polytheistic, but they are of different. There are differing religions. I'm gonna guess.
I think that's interesting because I think the Narn obviously have at least two religions and probably more.
Right.
But it seems that we're suggested that the Centauri, they might only have one religion. They have a lot of gods in that religion, and they don't seem to be particularly, I mean, that's Londo, but he doesn't seem to be particularly religious. While, we
He is
see
when
the
it suits
Narn.
him.
Well,
For
I'm
partying.
just
Well, we see the Narn that are much more religious, and of course the Minbari are much more spiritual and religious.
Well,
But the Centauri are kind of.
It seems that a lot of the Centauri deities, pantheon, they're more of a pantheon. I guess you could compare the Centauri. A lot of times we say they're like the decline, the Russian, but it might be just as legitimate to put them in like the late Roman Empire before Rome completely fell, as it was in decline.
Yeah,
And
I get that sense for them as well.
with a polytheistic, they'll pay lip service to any deity that's theirs. They'll even adopt, deities from other, conquered people, and bring them all into the fold, and so on and so forth.
Well, part of my point is that, I mean, again, maybe it's just Londo, but he doesn't really care. Like the gods are like whatever. But Jakar is quite religious, right?
Yeah.
He's very
which I find
Right, gets upset about
ironic.
the flower thing and everything.
Yeah, and I find that ironic that the most warlike, ready to fight ambassador is the one that we've seen practicing his faith more than we've seen that with anybody else.
right. Yeah, I mean, we saw Londo at that one party where he had the Sinclair and all of the command staff and all the other ambassadors were there, and he was crawling on the table and very very much. I think that was like one of the few instances where he was allowed to ad lib or anything like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Normally they're Straczynski was very strict on that, but
See, I don't. You think that? I mean, okay, yeah. Describing the Narn as warlike. I mean, I think. I don't know if I don't want to disagree with that, but I think that there's something. It's more than that. It's not like
they were pushed to it.
Yeah. They're not just
They
like,
want revenge.
hey, we want to fight because we like to fight. My sense of them is that they don't really want to fight. They were pushed into it because they had to rebel against the Centauri, and the Centauri did some pretty awful things.
And the thing is,
now they're kind of revengeful.
Right, and vengeful is a form of warlike because their objective is to wipe out the Centauri, and because we're gonna show them, and we're gonna put them in their place, and that means wiping them out. And so, they're aggressive. I guess is a better word. Aggressive toward getting back at them, and
vengeful.
And that just kind of is diametrically opposed to being a person of faith. So I just
not
think
necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Well,
but
because
look at stuff that happened during the Crusades, and look at stuff that happened during, there's a lot of.
I would agree that. I wouldn't call the Narn warlike because I think that a warlike species would, after wiping out the Centauri, would then move on to some other species and go, hey, we did that, let's move on. But my sense would be the Narn would be like, yeah, we've wiped out the Centauri, we're good, we're happy, we got vengeance. We're not gonna, work on someone else next.
Well, and I think the other thing too, when you compare to something like the Crusades, that is a mission that's driven by a faith, as opposed to with the Narns, you have their objective against the Centauri, but it's not motivated by their faith. It's motivated by their history with the Centauri. So that's a different thing from the Crusades, I think.
Sorry, I missed that. You just said, you said the Crusades, not I thought you said the Minbari.
No.
I think that would work as well.
Madman did point out, he says there are 4, Jaquan, Delenn, Justan, and Nakili. I think that's right.
For
I
is
think
that
that's
for who
I
is
think
that?
that's
Is that for the
for
Narn?
that would be for the Narns, yeah. I think those are the four religions. So that I'm not sure which one is the predominant one. Probably, I'm guessing Jakar's is probably the because there was that episode. Um, there
I
was
don't
that
think.
episode, you know, where
I
they
honestly,
They have to pray toward Mecca.
I don't. I
it was
honestly think that
basically.
Yeah.
I think that Jakar doesn't belong to a. It didn't seem to me like his was a main. He talked about being the leader of the people. You know, he was the highest rank on the station of people who follow his religion. But I didn't necessarily get the sense that his was the main religion. But maybe we didn't get the sense of any of that. Okay, so we kind of touched on. I think there's more to Londo that his arc.
Well, you've got the whole thing with that we saw just at the end, right, where he was involved. He got involved with Morden in recovery of the eye, which another house of Centauri was trying to use to get leverage with the Emperor or to become the Emperor.
Yeah.
The current Emperor is old and kind of
Weak.
Weak,
Described as weak. Yeah, they said it was weak.
right? And so there are people vying behind the scenes there. We don't get to see a lot of it. We do through that one episode, and then we see at the end, his big move where the Narn are getting aggressive along the border, and Morden comes to him and says, "Hey, my associates can take care of this," and Londo says, "Yeah," basically he says, "Tell your people that you're going to take care of this," and so Londo does, and it gets taken care of, and suddenly Londo is, elevated in the eyes of everyone because now he's someone who makes things happen, right?
Well, and don't forget that the reason why he trusted, he gave him probably a little more credit than he would have is because of the getting the eye, which of
Right.
course he has in his possession and could use that to, potentially try to claim his own,
Did Londo
self.
keep it, or did he hand it over?
He's got it. My understanding, he's got it there.
Yeah, I think he still
It's
got it.
safekeeping.
But
believed to be destroyed, right? It's assumed. everyone's
Right,
assumed-
but he's
that's
got
right.
it. They retrieved it for him because it was on the ship. It was going off, and the guy was, it got destroyed. Boom. But the fact that it reappeared and was given back to him, and then that's what earned the trust of was it Morden? Is that his name?
yeah, Morden.
So, right there, he kind of didn't think. He's like, well, okay, yeah, if you think you could do something, sure, I'll tell him. And he didn't fully think out the ramifications of. They
Well,
were obviously able to retrieve this from somewhere that they probably didn't even know, shouldn't have known where it was. Maybe they can.
Well,
Do
and
what
and
he
at the
asked.
end of that episode, when he's like, what how can I repay you for this? What do you want? And Morden's like, yeah, don't worry about it. Sometime we'll ask you for a favor.
Sometime,
Someday,
someplace,
yeah, we'll just come
we'll
back.
call
We'll
you
have
up
a
and we
conversation.
might need a favor.
And
Mhm.
you can see Londo's face completely shift at that point as he realizes the implications of what he's done. He's made a deal with the
He's
devil,
been bought.
and now he's going to have to deal with that at some point.
He
So,
sold his soul.
yeah. Speaking
Well,
speaking
yeah,
of this, Mindy mentioned a photograph, a meme that she had run across. I've got it here. I'm going to send it up here. You guys are going to have to look at the YouTube channels to see it. But this is something that Mindy found with Londo, and this is Giorgio Tsoukalos. Is that how it's pronounced? I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens, and his name is Londo. So I thought this was funny.
But Londo is kind of where we see the door opening to the darker future, right? This kind of jovial, clownish, don't really give a crap about anything
Buffoon.
guy,
Yeah.
has, well, I mean, we saw it in the episode. Morden came and said, "What do you want?" And he found someone whose his associates' goals apparently matched what Londo wanted.
Right.
And so we and we at the last episode we saw that, where that might be going. And so that's really an excellent kickoff into the next season. All through.
Well, yeah,
Londo.
because now there's definitely going to be some sort of hostility, ratcheting up between the Narn and the Centauri at this point. I mean, it's clear foreshadowing that there is going to be an escalation of hostilities between the two.
Yeah, and so Londo has already developed, pretty significantly, and Jakar has also, in my opinion at least, is he went from kind of this over the top, agitator type to, seeing that maybe the real Jakar is a little more thoughtful than he puts on.
He's very thoughtful in the last episode, right?
Mhm.
Sinclair's saying, "Hey, do this, do that, or we should do this," and he's a little more. My government's not going to allow me to, but he's not. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
Should we go over to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was just gonna say, it seems to me that if you had Star Trek equivalents to this, Jakar would be the Klingon.
Mm.
Delenn is the Romulan.
Really?
I'd say more Vulcan.
Not
Yeah.
the Vulcan?
Well, okay. Vulcanoid. Yeah, Vulcan. Yeah, Vulcan.
Spiritual Vulcan.
Londo is Ferengi.
No.
Yeah. They're opportunistic.
And
They
Kosh
look
is
out
the
for themselves.
Borg.
Well, if Delenn is the Vulcan, then Kosh could be the Romulan because they're very closed off. Because you remember, beginning of the Next Generation,
China.
we hadn't seen them in 50 years, and they're very private, keep to themselves. You don't know anything about them. They're inscrutable. So, I think, and again, we're talking shorthand here, because
I wouldn't say Romulans are inscrutable. I'd say they're just.
Well, the
just don't like
Romulans
anybody.
were supposed to represent China, kind of
Yeah.
thematically,
Yeah,
originally, meaning closed off society
yeah.
at the time. Anyway,
Yeah,
okay,
that's
so
what That's what I would say. Yeah, but anyway,
so I was gonna say, Delenn,
yeah, let's do Delenn.
obviously this is, the Earth hasn't had open conflict with any of the other races. It's just the Minbari, the Drakh, but they're not the Drakh. Sorry, the who was Death Eater, Death Walkers race, the ones that Earth came to the defense of, but meaning of the major races, the Dilgar.
The
thank
Drazi?
you. No, Dilgar.
The Dilgar.
Get where appears in Sci-Fi Chat. Thank you. So the Minbari were, the enemies of Earth, but they seem to be the most serene, non-hostile. I mean, at least what we see from Delenn. You see the warrior caste is more hostile, representing that history more. But they seem to have gotten past it, right? Earth and Minbar aren't at odds like the Centauri and the Narn are. They seem to have a pretty good working relationship, right?
Yeah, there's some hostility in some of the people still. It's been 10 years, but there's still certain like Sheridan is going to be some of them are still pissed off about it.
Yeah, but they're
There's
like
a lot of Minbari that are still pissed. But
rogues, basically.
yeah, it's not a general sort of thing. It's more of an individual.
I want to.
There doesn't seem to be hostility among Earthlings specifically towards Minbari.
I don't want to
Earthlings seem to just hate all the aliens.
Yeah, I don't want to derail anything, but Michael's comment here I think needs to be addressed. I am not diminishing either sets of species from either show. I'm making a comparison in terms of the type of relationship that each species has with the humans. So when you're talking about an aggressor species, an aggressive race, the Klingons and the Narns are at the same. Where I'm talking about equivalencies here. I'm not trying to oversimplify things. I just want to make that clear. This is not meant to diminish any of them. All of these races that they're still complex in and of themselves internally with their own societies and social structures. But I'm just making a comparison there between who they are, just so people can understand a little bit more about the mentality and the approach to life that each of these races take. So, and Star Trek is a good reference because people are more familiar with that. So, anyway,
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah, you're not saying they're exactly the same. You're just saying these are kind of like sort of, yeah. I mean, comparisons are fine, of course, sure.
Anyway, all right. So, Delenn.
Sorry, Cam, where you were?
Well, I was just
talking
saying,
about
Delenn, like early on, she calls Sinclair her friend and such, and they, there's a number of times throughout the season, so Delenn's major interaction is with Sinclair, right? That's kind of where she comes in so far.
Right.
She has a few notable interactions with Kosh, and she seems to have respectful relationships with Londo and pretty much everybody else. But she doesn't seem to be interested in anybody else other than Sinclair. And of course, we find out why, right? So she knows, she was one of the people there when Sinclair was captured. She knows more about it than he does. He doesn't remember it. But she doesn't tell him this stuff until the very end when she says, I'm going to tell you what happened. And then of course she goes into the chrysalis. So we don't ever see that, in season 1 here, what she was going to tell him.
And she seems to be, I don't know, working with Kosh. I don't know.
Yes.
Are there's some sort of deal with them because she goes and talks to him.
Right.
He shows her something. He flashes her something. I don't know what it is. But
Right.
But she kind of goes to him for reassurance, it seems.
Yes.
And then goes into the chrysalis in the last episode.
Does it feel like Delenn is preparing Sinclair for something,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
and then we don't get it because of the trap door?
Right. Yeah, it's again, and I think you're right, and I think they've kind of built that very slowly throughout the season. Other Minbari kind of come around, and Delenn is focused on him, and when they want to make her the leader of the Great Council, it's clear that other Minbari are maybe not on board with the whole idea of what she's focused on. But she's stayed on course. She quits essentially. Well, I guess she doesn't quit. She declines the leadership position because she thinks it's that important. So yeah, it's
And with
it's
her
the main
building that,
storyline.
and with her building that thing, which she starts out in the first season,
The
first episode.
deck of whatever it is.
All right, you're suddenly really loud there, Joe.
Oh,
And she starts out building that, and so by the end, by the end of the season, we realize that she's been there, and that's basically all she's been doing. Like that's her purpose for the whole season. She's been coming towards this, something with him and the chrysalis thing. She's been, first episode. She's like, all right, I'm probably gonna have to do this. And there's a couple comments of the others like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do this yet. You should, which I think they're referring to the chrysalis thing. You shouldn't do this yet. Maybe we should wait a little more. That kind of stuff. And she's like, no, it's not.
do you think that they know about that particular thing, or is that something new? I mean, is it something that Cam is gonna keep his mouth shut, but
Well, they know about. You're talking about the Great Council, right?
well, yeah. I mean, are they? Because they haven't said anything about this, and even I think even Lanier wasn't. Was he expecting her to do the cocoon thing, the chrysalis?
Probably not. But the Great Council certainly knows
Yeah.
Delenn's mission.
Plan.
Yeah.
Right. Her where she's
Destiny
going,
or whatever.
Yeah,
if
even
you
though
will.
they don't seem to believe in it necessarily, or they don't
Right.
think it's important.
Or
I
it's
mean, they
not
say,
time to do it or whatever.
yeah, they say as much. It's basically like we have other things. You have other things that are more important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of staying on course. This thing that occurred over 10 years ago now, that they discovered. She wants to find out about it, and that's
She's like, no, it's the time now. It's not. We don't have more things that are more important. This is the most important thing.
well. And Kosh, as you mentioned, Kosh is the one that kind of confirms that for her.
Yeah.
So, and we don't really know why, but clearly there is this
Or how he
interaction.
knows or anything.
Yeah, and I mean, and in the last episode, again, Kosh is suddenly much more present than he normally is, and he even comes to Sinclair and says, "Hey, by the way, we're supposed to talk to her about this," So, there are pieces moving behind the scenes involving Sinclair and Delenn, that they've presaged, throughout the series, season.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think overall her arc has been interesting. Starting off with her as it becomes revealed throughout the season. Um, she was there. She was part of the Great Council. We find out as the audience this, but of course Sinclair has no idea. He has no recollection
Yeah.
until later on, and then starts getting these bits and pieces. And
well, yeah, and
it-
Sinclair does express a desire to find these things out, but he's like harangued by all these other things going on, that he's not able to pursue it very much.
right. Yeah. But, I think her arc is so far has been very very interesting how she's interacted more and more, like towards the end, like as it was mentioned, with Kosh and some of the stuff that happened there.
Really,
but-
Yeah, I was like, what is that?
I
That's-
hear something crying.
That's Tuesday.
No, Tuesday was yesterday. Oh wait, no, that was today's Thursday.
Tuesday is the Tiffany cat that decided that we were the suckers he would live with.
Oh, he adopted you.
Yes.
Okay.
He just showed up one day and he never left.
That's how you get them.
Yeah.
But at any rate, yeah, I'm.
Just go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, finish up.
I was gonna say, I think the Minbari are an interesting people overall, and to see how she fits into that society, having been on the Great Council and them wanting to take the station of what leadership position, I guess, of the Great Council, and turning that down because she has a bigger calling, is a fascinating thing. And I did see, who was it that Michael had mentioned that the Minbari are more akin to the Enterprise level Vulcans, or when we were first forging relationships,
Yeah.
with them, as opposed to the ones that we know from the original series or Next Generation. And I could see that, the difference being that we never went to war with the Vulcans in the Star Trek universe. So, and yet they were very combative. And the Minbari were very combative against the Earth Alliance.
Right. I mean, like
Like ready, like they
were
could
gonna
have
wipe 'em out,
decimated us.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they clearly had the ability to do it.
And yet they're a very religious people too at the same time, and it's
sure,
but
well,
and there's a fighting between the castes too, or the infighting, not
right.
real fighting.
Now, I think there is an interesting point there. So again, not to get too on the nose, but the Earth is kind of like Japan, right? I mean, it's basically Earth was crushed by the Minbari, and then they were let up and said, well, just kind of go. So I mean, how do you recover from that, right? It's like, well, we just got shown how weak we are, and now we rebuild to kind of take our place. But it's like, we know they're still out there. It's not like they can't put us back in our place if they wanted to. But maybe maybe there's some hubris going on with humans in this world where they're like, well, fine, we're gonna, because that's part of the backstory is that the human Earth got too big for their britches, right?
Yeah.
Because of their involvement with the Dilgar War and everything, where they basically were the big heroes, and it's like, we're major players
knocked
now.
us down a couple of pegs.
Right, and
Yeah.
so I don't think they really go into that in the series, that Earth is kind of humbled. They don't seem humbled at all, really.
Yeah.
Well, clearly not the way the senators talk, and the growing sentiment against the aliens
Yeah.
on Earth. Yeah. I mean,
How do you avoid that though? How do you avoid being like, oh, we're not just kind of puppets of the Minbari at this point? It's like we're alive because they let us be alive.
right.
Uh, well, maybe.
I kind of get that sense too, that what you were mentioning about the Earth being sort of put in their place, because
Maybe we're like
'cause,
Germany.
I mean, they got their butts kicked 10 years ago by the Minbari, yet they're building these Babylon 5, these Babylon giant stations, and they're sticking them in the middle, and they're saying, "Hey, this is the center of diplomacy in this part of the galaxy. Everyone should come here. We're the it seems a little unusual that they're after getting their butts kicked you know so quick, well, not
It-
quickly,
it- it's it,
but
it's
thoroughly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we were basically. It was literally, the line was, that was the last battle that we were, if we lost that, we were done for.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that was it. And suddenly
And Sinclair even
they had a
said,
change of heart.
Sinclair even said they had us on the ropes. We were done, and then they just
Yep.
stopped.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's the major mystery of the show to this point, right?
Right.
And
why
what
is
would that
happening?
do to people, though? I mean, I think that's.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Cam. I think that is. I mean,
You would
How
think there would be some
humiliated.
psychological impact from that, right?
oh yeah, you're going to have a lot of people that now have resentment for anything that's not human. Clearly, I could see that, just like you would have. I'm sure there was a lot of resentment from the Japanese, after their surrender. Why did the government give up? Blah blah blah. I'm sure there was a lot of resentment from Germans. A lot of them just, of course, a lot of them ran off, but
Well, even more from World War One, the surrender.
well, yeah, World War One, the German, that the World War One surrender from Germany is what led to World War Two,
yeah, and a
ultimately.
lot of other.
And the buildup of the German, yeah. So in many cases, the Earth Minbari War could very much have wound up being like a World War One conclusion,
Well,
where
and
Earth is Germany.
as we go through the seasons here, we might see some of those kinds of themes come out. At some point, we could talk about, Straczynski's inspirations for a lot of these storylines, and they do have real world connections, I'd say. But
I mean, what else can we draw from? I mean,
Well,
our,
sure,
our
but I-
imaginations are going to draw from history and from our imaginations taking that. So
yeah, I just mean I think you can make some pretty clear analogs.
yeah. Well, and like I've said before, you notice, like with Londo and his people, what year was it when this came out? Well, that was right around the fall of communism, and when the Soviet Union fell apart, and now the people are in, their society is in decline, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. So that's why we made that connection early on. But the opulence and the excess and all this, that kind of was what led me to making that connection with maybe the fall of the Roman Empire. So yeah, maybe it was meant to be kind of a combination of both.
Yeah. Well, so the way I take Delenn overall is, okay, so you got Londo and Jakar, right? They're just out there trying to represent their own interests, and Earth
Right.
kind of seems the same way, like when they found out about the planet and all that, and it's like, oh, we're taking this for our advantage.
And the drug, the immortality drug.
Well, yeah, and I was going to mention that with Kosh for a second, but in terms
Yeah,
of
that's right.
Delenn, though, Delenn seems to have, the Mimbari don't need to seem to prove anything. They don't need, like, they're not really looking to expand or anything like that. So through her, we see, someone that's looking at a bigger picture or something, uh, not just about political power and such. That there's more out
Greater
there.
purpose
Yeah,
in the
right,
universe.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's a stark difference in that way. And then Snob, you mentioned Kosh and the thing about the immortality thing, and that was really the biggest Vorlon i- interaction we saw, right, this season.
Yeah, the only time they really stuck. I mean, other than
You're not ready.
they're kind of sticking their nose in with, helping Deleen to do what she thinks to do a little bit, but that's kind of
Right.
hands off. Yeah, yeah, that's kind of like my impression is, yeah, yeah, don't worry, you're doing the right thing, carry on with it. Like that's
Well, and
kind of
we've
what
been
he's
told.
saying to her. But you're right, you know, sticking their
Well,
nose and blowing up the immortality drug is like
Right.
direct. Like, nope,
It-
that's not gonna happen. Boom.
and as a reminder, the immortality, this Dilgar, or the Death Walker,
Mhm.
developed a way to make people immortal at the cost of killing someone else,
Right.
and and was going to use that to create strife, basically, right? I mean, it was like
Yeah.
sell it to the highest bidder, and everything, and the Vorlon just came in with like, nope, we're not having that happen. I mean, and so again, like we were talking about the Minbari, or being a power level above Earth, the Vorlon just came in and above that,
Said yeah, not a you're gone.
Yeah, I see the it's the Centauri and the Narn and the Earth are kind of at the same level, maybe. Maybe the Narn are a little bit lower because they probably have less planets than the Centauri, for example. And then the Mabari are above them, and then the Vorlons are just
Well, and then
I don't
Jakar
know.
also talks about something else, right? With Catherine, that's like there's things out there that make us look like ants.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
Jakar's aware of that.
Yeah.
Presumably, the Minbari and the Vorlon would be aware of that too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's all the there's these kind of different levels, and we're seeing Earth. If we're supposed to look at the show through the eyes of Earth, it's like you're kind of at the bottom of that rung almost.
Well, and it's not all Minbari either. Obviously that's Delenn's take on things, but there's clearly some dissension in the ranks among the other cast. They're kind of like, yeah, we think you guys. I can foresee some building strife between the Grey Council, the religious leaders, and the military cast because I think it's been quelled for the moment in this season, but I definitely can see that something. I could see an uprising at some point, perhaps in the future. So I mean, and then this pure speculation. I'm not spoilers or nothing like that. I'm not. I'm just thinking, I could see that happening.
Sure. Well,
Um,
sorry, go ahead, stop.
I was gonna say, do you want to move on to? Are we?
Well,
done with Mabari? You want to mention
I-
Kosh, maybe quick?
I just wanted to see if I don't know if Jason or Jeff wanted to say anything. How do you viewed either one of them? I
do
kind
you
of gave
mean,
my
like-
meaning. I said this is
Deleen or
what I
Kosh?
think they're representing. What are your guys' final seasonal thoughts on those two characters?
Kosh is interesting because he's very sparsely used, and I don't know if that was a deliberate thing. I have to presume that it was, but
I think I saw something. Uh,
I mean, we don't even know if the same person played Kosh the whole time. And theoretically,
Yeah.
like, they could have had a
Totally.
voice actor. But he's obviously in the pilot. And there's an assassination attempt, which kind of kickstarts the whole introduction of us to Babylon 5 and the different dichotomies of everything that's going on. And there's something mysterious. There was the episode where he's talking to the vicar, and he's basically he's basically communicating in jumble words that don't make any sense. And of course, Talia is just frustrated to no end with that. But in reality, the vicar is literally trying to record everything about what the humans are capable of. He seems to be, whenever we see him, he never wants to act except when it reaches that certain level, like with the uh, the serum that would give longevity or immortality to humans, and you're not ready yet for that type of stuff. But other than that, it's always a conflict. He kind of lets the lesser races, if you will, the lesser species, kind of figure it out amongst themselves, and he's kind of just stays back in the distance, kind of keeping a watch on things to make sure that nothing too serious gets out of hand. He's at a different plane, different level, I think so.
No.
And I don't know if that's his people. I mean, we've seen other ships, but he's the only Vorlon we've seen, right? So
Yeah, I think so.
All right,
well-
I think the thing with Kosh for me is that it was like Jeff said, he seems to know more than he's letting on, but it doesn't he doesn't strike me as being manipulative. There's an element of the character almost where he's tapped into a different plane of existence, almost, where you have the physical reality of the station, and he's interacting with the people, but it's almost like there's a metaphysical, maybe
he's
not
an
necessarily
enlightened being.
he's an enlightened being, and so
Yeah.
he's tapped into something that the rest of the station doesn't see, and that's interesting to me, although we don't get very much of it here in this first season, what
No.
his connection is to that that next plane of existence. But um it has a tendency to make him a little bit more of an outsider than any of the rest of them.
Sure.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's like he doesn't even have interest in this in many of these other things. It's like
These minor
um,
conflicts are just beneath him.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Whatever.
Yeah.
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 Outpost nerd kind of disagrees with you, Jason. But for me, it's like Kosh is like he knows, he kind of sees I don't know, see the future, but he knows that things are going in a certain way. He knows where things are heading towards, and so he's going to nudge the pieces, the certain people, Sinclair, whoever it is, Deleen, in
Yeah.
certain ways in order to get to somewhere.
Well, and Outpost Nerd's point doesn't contradict mine.
Mm-mm.
Well, he says he's extremely manipulative.
Well, yeah,
I
but
never-
if you're
I
only
don't- yeah,
tweaking
I didn't
things when it needs to happen,
Yeah, that wasn't
push
my
it
point.
along.
My point was he's aware of things outside of the physical reality inside of
the
Babylon
other
5.
species that are, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for example, you see that with the shadow. When he sees the shadows, he says, "You're not." I think I posited at one point, that his people may be the light and the shadows are the opposite. They're almost like that's
Yeah.
his level, and they are
Angels and demons.
at that level, like maybe Londo, the Narn and the Centauri are with one another, but
Well,
at a higher level.
He did seem to be glowing a little bit when he was. opening
He
the scene.
does, and that's where I got the whole maybe he's enlightened, and then you've got the shadow people that are obviously trying to be underhand, and it's a battle of good versus evil, light versus dark, whatever you want to call it, the Jedi versus the Sith.